George Smith was a happy young newlywed on his honeymoon cruise in 2005 when he mysteriously disappeared at sea, never to be heard from again. His death still unexplained, but that may soon change. Take a look. The disappearance of newlywed George Smith captivates the country in 2005, leaving us wondering what happened.
We have no closure as we have no answers. George has not surfaced, so we have no body to bury and we have no grave to pray at.
On the evening of July 4th, George and his new bride Jennifer party, drinking into the wee hours of the morning. Details aren't clear, but it appears the couple separates, she passing out in a hallway, he continuing to party with others. It's the last time George Smith is ever seen.
The maintenance crew, which discovered her asleep on the corridor floor, contacted our security. Security came to the scene, contacted our medical facility, and upon trying to awaken her or revive her, she woke up.
The next day, Smith cannot be found, and suspicion turns to the new bride, Jennifer.
When we first located Mrs. Smith in the spa having a treatment, her first reaction was that she wasn't really concerned about George not being able to be located. She stated that, in fact, he had on one occasion had actually spent the entire night in another cabin.
Later, the captain tells the bride the grim news. Bloodstains are found on a railing and lifeboat canopy below their room, and that her husband, most likely, went overboard. The cruise line comes under scrutiny for their action and inaction.
The family has been severely traumatized by the death of their son, obviously, and they've also been traumatized by Royal Caribbean's actions and their attempts to sweep this tragedy under the carpet and from the get-go portray this tragedy in a false light in order to protect their image.
There was a cover-up that started, I think, pretty much immediately when the crime went down and then continued right through now.
George's wife receives $1 million settlement from Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines and then remarries. Now, new evidence. Cell phone video of 3 Russian men bragging about Smith's death within hours of his disappearance. One allegedly making an incriminating statement. Will this bring closure and answers to George Smith's family?
We're hopeful that this videotape, in conjunction with all the other evidence that we've accumulated up to this point, will finally lead to arrests.
Cristin Marandino is editor of Greenwich Magazine, and she has been covering this story. Thanks for being with us, Cristin.
Thank you for having me.
Well, based upon what I've read, you have done the most in-depth written analysis of this particular case, and having done so, do you believe that there should have been an arrest?
I absolutely think there should have been an arrest. I think when you look at all of the circumstances surrounding this case, you have passkey records, you have eyewitnesses, you have ear witnesses, you have a detailed timeline of what was heard going on in the room. You have all of this stuff. That in and of itself, one would think might be enough. Then we come to find that there's this videotape that's out there. The FBI's had it now for 7 years. It has one of the men making a very incriminating statement.
Well, and before I go to what is actually on that camcorder tape or whatever it is, I mean, if the FBI has had this for years, how come we're just hearing about this tape?
That is exactly my question as well, and I do not know. When we found out that we could go ahead and go with the story that the tape existed, we certainly decided to grab it and run with it and get it out there.
Okay, what is and who is on that tape?
Who is on the tape are the 3 Russians, as they have been known. And what is on the tape is them passing around this camcorder, mocking George Smith's death, making very crude comments and just horrible. Then the kind of peak of it all, one of them stands up and says, "We sent that guy paragliding without a parachute."
That guy, of course, meaning George Smith. Okay, the groom. And if they had this came as a result of the ship giving it to the FBI?
Correct. Well, how it came out and how I've come to know about it was when the cruise ship settled with the Smith family, they turned over, which was a big key piece, is they turned over all of their case files, all of the evidence, and this tape was in that
And Cristin, they say that there was a retired deputy police chief who documents the time when the 3 Russians and the 1 American boy bring George back to the suite. And he describes what going on in the room?
He describes it's Clete Hyman, and yes, as you said, he's a former police chief. You know, I mean, you can't have a better ear witness than that to start documenting times. And he hears arguing out on the balcony. He hears things being thrown about. He promptly calls security. Security hadn't arrived at that point. He then hears the words good night, very loudly, as though someone's trying to usher people out. He looks out of his door. He sees 3, not 4 men leaving, which all 4 of them said they all went to the room and they all left together. Only 3 left. One was in the room.
These ships have camera surveillance.
Correct.
Wouldn't they identify the 3 men who are leaving that room at it's after 4 in the morning at this point?
Exactly. I have asked the same question, and apparently there is not video right at that point in that hallway. I find it hard to believe.
Well, and then, of course, they describe a horrific thud.
And then there is the horrific thud that was heard, yes.
Okay, and what do they see the next morning?
And then the next morning, one of the passengers on the ship went out just to take some cell phone pictures as the boat was docking in Turkey, and they find this horrible blood splatter, which come to see that, you know, there's a footprint in there, and one can only imagine that that was George trying to stand up and slipping.
All right. Cristin Marandino, thanks so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
And a great article, by the way.
Thank you.
And next, our panel on George Smith's disappearance. Can the new video finally lead to arrest? A night of excessive drinking, gambling, and partying ends with honeymooner George Smith disappearing. Former prosecutor Joey Jackson, defense attorney Keith Sullivan, former NYPD detective Pat Brosnan with us again, along with Candace DeLong, former FBI profiler. All right, Candace, I'm going to start with you. You got FBI surveillance video. They have that. They have the forensics. They have the statements. We now find out they've had this video of these 3 Russians passing around the kind of a camcorder and basically saying George took a paraglide without a parachute. You know, what does that tell you?
Well, I'm actually shocked and appalled that they had that videotape for such a long time. I can only think it was overlooked. I have a feeling, although there hasn't been an arrest for 7 years, this new information coming to light might push things
Well,
on.
I got to tell you, it's very scary, Pat. We've got 10 million Americans every year who go on a cruise ship. So these ships are floating crime scenes. I mean, how do you solve these kinds of cases? If the FBI has surveillance tape from the boat, they do the forensics, or they've got the forensics, they've got the interviews, they've got the ship's tapes, and then a camcorder, 3 guys saying, hey, he took a paraglide without a parachute. I mean, are Americans safe on these boats?
Well, here's the thing. The first part of the question is the problem is, in my view, that there's too many cooks spoil the broth. There's the water. Whatever water it's floating in, they have jurisdiction. Whoever's flag is flying on the mast of that boat has jurisdiction, and on top of it is the FBI because it involves an American abroad.
Yeah, but the FBI had all the evidence. That's no excuse.
No, it's not an excuse. What I'm saying is, in my view, and I'm very familiar with this case, without this tape, I always felt there was probable cause. Without the tape it nails it. It just makes it a cupcake. It makes it a cakewalk. But without the tape, you had eyewitnesses, an ear witness, a deputy chief. You had a detailed timeline. 4 went in, 3 left. Footprint over the railing.
Where he was trying to get out.
This is an easy one.
All right, Candace DeLong, I'm going to go back to you before the lawyers. You were involved in this right from the beginning. And what does this, the blood on that canopy tell you? Let's get that up on the screen.
Well, as the day that this particular photograph was released to the public, I'm looking at that, and I saw more than a blood stain. What I saw was it appeared to me, all right, at the bottom, the far south end of your TV set is possibly a head, then there's arms and legs, but there's this huge pool of blood kind of high up by where I think the head would be. My conclusion is that George was possibly stabbed. There is blood in his stateroom, that he was stabbed in the heart. He ends up being thrown overboard. They think they're throwing him into the water. He lands on this canopy, and he bleeds out. And that's the large pool of blood where I think is the center of this blood stain that looks like a human torso to me.
And what's interesting, guys, and I'm going to go to the lawyers now, is that, you know, this is a honeymoon couple. And there's talk on the ship that they have their wedding money with them. And that night, they're in the casino, and she says to George, I don't have money. He says, go back to the room. I understand, and I spoke to the family's attorney, George's parents' attorney, just a little while ago. He said that George had a very expensive watch on. All right, lawyers, hit it. Joey?
Absolutely. Well, if you look at that and you look at the fact that they talked about almost $50,000 of cash perhaps being in the room, now you may have some motivation as to why it's done. The tape alone, Judge, obviously is incriminating, but if you match that with the deputy's remarks as to furniture moving around, as to the noises, as to people just shouting and screaming, as to, you know, good night, then I think, and then the three of them leaving the room, I think it gives the tape corroboration and makes it further damaging. The final part, though, is the FBI. I mean, this is an agency that is very competent. And if they're sitting on a tape like this, you have to wonder why. Is there
competent, Keith? Is this competence?
Judge, this isn't competent evidence at all, and there's no reason the FBI should go forward at this time. There is no statute of limitations on a murder case. Let the case percolate. Speak to these witnesses as time goes on. You never know who they're going to speak to in the course of time. They may brag. The videotape itself is the day after they're interrogated by the Turkish police. The day after they have thorough discussions.
The day. In other words,
afternoon of.
Yes, the afternoon.
But it's hours later. So they simply could be parroting, making callous, you know, disgraceful jokes about this.
How do they know he went over the... Let me tell you what's going on. The noise in the room, they're rifling through the room looking for the money. That's the noise that the chief hears next door. Anyway, Joey, Keith, Pat, Candace, thanks so much for being with us this evening.